Welcome, everyone. I'm Ruben Aronin, and we're going to start this webinar in just a moment. We're just going to give folks a minute to fully join the webinar. We'll be starting in just a minute. In the interest of time, I think we're going to make that a quick minute and jump in and get started. Good afternoon. I'm Ruben Aronin. I'm a principal at the Better World Group, and we're a boutique environmental consulting firm that works on climate justice, clean transportation, conservation and racial justice policy priorities in California and in states across the country. I lead our clean transportation practice and have the privilege of partnering with some of the people you're going to hear from today and collaborating with advocates that have been helping to push for accelerating a zero-emission vehicle marketplace here in California, across the country, and truly around the world. E2 and Cal ETC are so excited by your participation and to be co-hosting this webinar. And just to give a little bit of grounding in those organizations, let me tell you about Environmental Entrepreneurs, or E2. They were founded right here in California nearly 25 years ago. They're a national nonpartisan group of business leaders, investors, and professionals from every sector of the economy. They advocate for smart policies that are good for the economy and good for the environment. We're also proud to be co-hosted by Cal ETC, a nonprofit association committed to the successful introduction and large-scale deployment of all forms of electric transportation, including plug-in electric vehicles of all weight classes, transit buses, port electrification, off-road electric vehicles, and equipment and rail. And today we have two outstanding leaders from E2 and Cal ETC joining us to provide their unique perspectives for this conversation. We're focused on providing this information for legislative staff as well, and we know it can be difficult to access clear and focused educational information to help you design smart policies. Our goal today is to give you a better foundation for understanding electrification policies and barriers facing the market today. This is a series of 5 webinars. Our first 2 covered baseline information on EVs and reliable and equitable EV charging. And to this end, we'll want to get feedback, not just in questions for these panelists, but what it might be useful to cover in future conversations. With that table setting, it's really now my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Ariel Fan, with GreenWealth Energy. She is the founder and CEO of this really extraordinary, innovative company that is helping the public and private sector transition to a greener future. GreenWealth Energy is also the first woman and minority-led EV charging company certified in the state of California, and certainly not the last. I'll now pass it over to Ariel to share more about yourself and the work that you lead.
Great. Thank you so much, Ruben. Hi, everyone. As Ruben said, my name is Ariel. And about 8 years ago, I founded GreenWealth Energy, originally as a lighting company and general green building consulting firm. Now we specialize in developing, owning, and operating light-duty EV charging with an equity lens focused on community scale charging with cities and public programs. So I'm very excited to share a bit more about what we do. Great. So a bit about GreenWealth. We are a very impact-driven company. Our namesake, GreenWealth, represents economic and social prosperity for all communities, and I'll get a bit more into that impact in a moment. We are based in Southern California. Today, about 20 people here, and we serve throughout the state of California, focused primarily on equity programs. And what is it that we do? What is our product? We make charging a no-brainer by making it faster, simpler, and no cost. So we are a charge point operator. We partner with community scale programs, which I'll go into in a bit. where we bring grants, incentives, tax credits, and we leverage that to bring private sector capital, ultimately making charging programs where the infrastructure costs nothing for the building owner or the city to implement. And then we do a cost share and community profit share over time. We do also, we're a vertically integrated company in-house. We have electricians, project managers, engineers, as well as a robust policy team. So the equity that I speak of, we're very unique in the space, being a hybrid contractor and developer of projects, investor, and also a very mission-driven company, with a lot of our things falling outside of what a traditional infrastructure company does. We do participate in many workforce development initiatives throughout the state, including CARB's ZEV Workforce Development Task Force. We also participated in trainings with Lacey, where we're directly, and also with LA County, where we're helping Lacey prepare EV charging technician, as well as project management training. We're in touch with LA County, and we recently won a DOE grant to prop up the first EV installers training throughout the trade tech colleges in LA City region. We are a company that is 75% women and also 80% people of color too. So not only are we about the community, but the leadership and the team that we have here is really representative of that. I'm very proud of our current program, and I'll get into very soon our unique perspective from living and breathing what it means to implement chargers in low income and disadvantaged communities, and the equity barriers that we see, whether those are social barriers, barriers of sufficient grid infrastructure, or financial barriers. I think one program that we have that is really exemplary of this type of work and these issues that we see is our program with Los Angeles County and SoCal REN, which is funded in part by CEC's Reach 2 grant. With this program, we are implementing about 10 million of level 2 EV charging in multifamily buildings, serving about 30,000 households with no cost EV charging. This program targets anywhere between 50 to 75% of low income, and we've gotten over 60 letters of support from different cities and agencies, as well as multifamily building owners and operators to participate in this program. So a lot of the policy recommendations that we have put forward today and part of our conversation is really from our perspective of being a project manager, project designer, as well as a direct installer, working with the residents, working with the building owners to install charging in these equity impacted communities. And so I have two slides here. We see, in terms of policy recommendations, we really need a parallel path to address the equity barriers and accelerate adoption, specifically for the marginalized communities here in California. And we have a chicken and egg issue here of, we need to build chargers in order to have people accelerate their adoption of EVs, but we also need EVs in order to justify the spending on and the installation of more chargers. So this first slide, funding, number one, we need more funding for multifamily EV charging. California has charging requirements for currently for a lot of new build multifamily, but we need more advocacy for tenants for older buildings. Currently, over 70% of LMI households live in buildings built before 1990. So I'll say that one more time. When we have, we're focusing on those that live in low or moderate incomes, over 70% are renting in apartments in buildings that are before 1990, but we have made a lot of strides currently with new building code and Cal Green, but there's still a huge unmet demand of existing multifamily renters. The next point we have, rideshare EV drivers are often waiting for very long times, and that's a huge equity issue. Right now, rideshare companies like Uber and Lyft, those drivers are adopting EVs about 5 times faster than the average person in California. Yet they often are without charging at home. We've heard of stories where in order to charge outside, they have to go to DC chargers, often in the middle of the night, often waiting in lines, waiting as often as 2 hours to use a DC charger. Our proposed policy recommendation is we need more chargers in multifamily communities where these drivers live. And in doing so, they will be an early adopter in LMI communities that will allow us to expand further to the residents of these communities. Next, we have right to charge laws. So we do have some laws in place for renters. Right to charge, just as a briefing, anyone in a multifamily building as a resident can go to their building owner and request for chargers to be installed, but the building owner has to allow it. While it is well-intentioned, it does put the cost burden on the renters, and the building owner is actually not required to pay out of their own pocket to install chargers. So while well-intentioned, right to charge actually does not have a very significant at all of an impact of moving the needle and installing more chargers in buildings. In closing for this particular slide on the charging side of the house, programs like the CEC's REACH programs targeting a multifamily are excellent, and especially as many of those programs are equity focused and are focused on 50% or more low-income communities. There's just not enough funding. As we go into low-income communities, a lot of them exist in buildings that historically were not built very well, or the grid infrastructure is not there. And as a result, it's actually more expensive to install in these communities. Therefore, we do need a greater amount of funding to meet this need. We'll also discuss new incentives around the vehicles themselves. So historically, since 2010, this is really exciting, nearly $2 billion was distributed in incentives throughout California for the purchase of EVs through 6 core programs, but only 15% of those funds went to low-income households. So as a policy recommendation, again, using just rideshare drivers as only one grouping of drivers, they're already adopting EVs 5 times faster than the average person in California. And these programs that are coming out must incentivize the vehicle for these communities, whereas in the past, when there's been incentives, it's been largely going to middle or upper income earners. Next, low utilization discourages investment in low income charging. So we need policies to bolster the secondary market for used EVs. Used EVs, this is very interesting, currently range between $19,000 to $30,000 for a used one. Not to mention insurance premiums are especially high for EVs in general as a vehicle class. So incentives targeting the secondary market for used EVs, which then allows more opportunities for those in low-income communities to purchase EVs or rent EVs, would be very strong to further bolster the adoption in this group. And that's it for me. And so I'll pass it to my friend Eileen, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we let Eileen get started, let me just give you a little bit, and this doesn't even cover close to her bio, but just for reference, Eileen serves as the executive director of ETcommunity, an organization dedicated to working with communities to ensure the environmental and job benefits are realized in all communities, particularly those most impacted by air pollution and/or economic disparity. Eileen, we look forward to hearing about your perspectives and the wealth of knowledge based on your work with communities.
Well, thank you, Ruben, and also E2 and Cal ETC for inviting me to speak with you today. You're going to hear some of what I say, echoing Ariel, who is a partner in this effort. The Electric Transportation Community Development Corporation, it's called ETcommunity, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. And as Ruben said, we are hoping to use this economic transition, this period of economic transition that we feel we're in as we move from petroleum products to more electricity. We'd like to see that transition uplift and support these many communities that have been left behind in the jobs and economic market, as well as obviously environmental justice issues. So that is where I spend all of my time. And to be quite honest, my own personal concern, and I think a lot of us share this concern, is that as we make this pretty big economic transition to a new mobility and transportation resource where our energy is coming from, not from oil, but from electricity. We don't want to see a situation where these communities that have already been left behind get further left behind, that their mobility options are reduced and that their economic opportunities are reduced. And so that, to be honest, when I came into this, I thought I just want to uplift this communities. I want to make sure that we at least don't fall behind. I'm now actually concerned for a lot of the reasons Ariel brought up, that we may be setting up a situation where we are creating mobility deserts or further economic burdens on these communities that are already so burdened. So I do want to first start with the cost of EVs, and I think Ariel hit it really well in that it does, in many of these communities, it does feel like all of the light duty incentives are gone before they ever reached these priority communities. And that's why things like used car incentives or incentives that are targeted just for people who live in priority communities, many of whom can afford a new car. They just need the incentive to cover the differential between an electric car and another new car. Those incentives need to be available. And right now, in all honesty, they're not. And it does feel like as we now get to this point where electrification, you see all these announcements coming out of from our policymakers about how great California is doing. And I don't want to take away from that because I think California is leading the nation. That's clear. But it's also true that if in the communities that I work in, there are very few EVs, and the incentives available for them don't exist right now. Or if they do exist, there's all kinds of barriers that weren't in place for more affluent communities, like having to turn in an old car or bear the burden of the additional insurance and other costs that come with electric vehicles. So I will just say that I think we have in our rush to focus on goods movement and trucks, which are also really essential. It's almost like we don't think we can do both at once. And my plea to you today is to think about the fact that we don't want to leave these communities behind. And so when it comes to light duty vehicles, we can invest in both trucks and light duty mobility options in priority communities. So that's my first message is please don't forget, we can do both. We have done both as a state. We're really good at it. So I'd hate to see us stop now. The other issue, of course, is that in these communities, they really are, at this moment, they are charging deserts. There's no access to charging. So even if you want and can afford a new or a used EV, you really can't purchase one because you have no access to home charging or any community charging. And I will just say that the state, and I feel I just want to give huge kudos to the efforts and the focus right now on multifamily dwelling and really uplifting those areas of the state and making EVs accessible to people who live in multifamily dwellings. And that is really good. But majority of the money that's gone into community charging, so to speak, has gone into DC fast charging along corridors in these communities. And those DC fast chargers aren't intended for use by people who live in the communities, but rather for people that are traveling through and stop and get a charge. And that still, by the way, benefits the community because people come in and they're usually in shopping mall. There's tax revenue, there's other revenue. It's not like there's no community benefit, but these chargers are not community chargers. They are intended to facilitate the expansion in the market for people that don't live in those communities. And so even though we need those investments and those need to continue, we really also need to focus on multi-unit dwelling investments. And where ETcommunity comes in, we focus on community charging in places in the community where the community already gathers. So places of worship and community centers are our primary focus, and that's where we work with, so that we can install charging in these places of worship or community centers that already serve the community in so many ways. Every single one of the partners that we work in provides food for people with food insecurity. Every single one of them worked on the vaccination clinics that came in when a lot of people, particularly in Black communities, but in many low-income communities, did not trust when the COVID vaccination came out. They were not going to go, they did not trust government. And so when the places of worship and when the community centers and these services that these people that are trusted in the communities, took those vaccines and then allowed and then made them available to the community, they became a trusted resource. So these are the kinds of locations that we're looking at for community charging. The other benefit of these kinds of locations for community charging is that they're considered safe spaces. So whereas there are definitely security issues in many of these communities, for these locations, they are considered safe spaces. They do have security already in place that may need to be beefed up, but they could serve the community in this way. And so we would like to see some of the funding go towards not just the DC corridor charging, not just the multi-unit dwelling charging, but also community charging that is focused on gathering spaces, safe spaces where the community members already come. And so they may not have home charging, they may not have workplace charging, they may not have a job, but if they can go to their local food distribution site, or every single one of the places we work with also provides child care, there's cooling centers, there's all kinds of services that they're already used to getting from the community resources that we work with. So that's kind of where we see a desert, if you will. The state is starting. I would say the Energy Commission in particular, I would give a lot of kudos to them as they've tried to think about how to fund community charging that is actually accessible to community members that do not have access to home charging. The other thing that I would just emphasize is that for these locations that we work with and these communities that we work in, they have other priorities that just take precedence over electric vehicles. And that's just, they are delivering food, they are delivering, life supporting necessary services. So when we come in to those spaces, then they are sacred, whether they're faith community locations or not. When we come into those spaces, we have to respect and recognize that all of these other priorities and these community resources take precedence. And so if our investment in electric vehicles or electric vehicle charging does not lift up the community and benefit those programs that are all oversubscribed, then we cannot expect these communities to embrace this technology, because they need food more than they need an electric car. And so there's when I do believe that when government comes into, or when even local government comes into any of these locations, there has to be a recognition that they provide many other services, all of which are more valuable than the electric car and the charging infrastructure that you're offering. And so what you want to do is really look for ways that this new technology can uplift the community. And we have many other partners. I would say, you know, Ariel and GreenWealth is one of them that really are committed to that. We want to electrify, we want to provide this service, but we also recognize that we cannot take away from any existing priorities. And in fact, in some cases, and we look for these cases where adding electric vehicle charging won't just increase mobility, it'll increase access for other services. And I'll give you an example just to make this really solid. And that is, we have one location that we work with that serves as a cooling center in their community. They have not been able to upgrade their air conditioning to support the new hotter world, to be quite honest. And so when they went to upgrade their air conditioning, the utility said, we can't, you know, you don't have enough, it would cost thousands of dollars in order to just, in addition to the cost of the air conditioning unit, just to upgrade their electrical so that they could get air conditioning. If they put in electric vehicle charging and that's funded, then that panel upgrade, those electrical upgrades also support the cooling center so that this whole community has a safe place to go when there is a heat wave. So it's those kinds of synergies that we're looking for in these communities where electrification actually will provide and lift up in many other ways the communities. So I really appreciate being here today, and look forward to the conversation and questions from our attendees. And thank you again.
Thank you so much, Eileen, for that broad perspective of the needs, challenges, and opportunities in so many diverse frontline communities who continue to need to see the EV service economy stand up in many of their communities. And Ariel, thank you so much for the overview of the terrific work that you and your team are leading in the multifamily housing sector in particular. At this time, I really want to invite our participants to put in your questions in the Q&A forum. You know, big or small, we've got experts that can give further perspective on the EV marketplace, challenges, opportunities in both the electric vehicle market, as well as the charging side of it. And so while people are thinking of the questions that they might want to pose, I just wanted to elevate Aaron's question about where the CEC grant dollars came from. Ariel, you provided the detail of that in the response that everybody should be able to view, but I thought I would just query a little bit more on how accessible those dollars are, where you see, you know, are there sufficient resources to cover the needs of the sector, and what optimally, you know, do you see the state needing to provide to ensure that there's adequate funding for the kinds of installs that you're doing?
So I think Eileen's made great points, and to reiterate sort of the thesis of our presentation is we need more multifamily funding, and we need more funding for the difference in how much more it costs to address these low-income communities because of buildings that are old and poorly built, and grid infrastructure that has not been there, where these buildings have been and communities have been marginalized over a long period of time. And also more opportunities for renters. I think from just looking at taxpayer resources, by putting in multifamily, we can put in a charger that serves many households. That's how with $10 million, which was, I'll break it down, 3.6 was CEC grant funds, together with utility rebates and also ITC, IRS 30C tax credits for low-income communities. We were able to get that up to 5.5 million. And then we bring in private capital for 4.5. And so with 10 million, we're really able to serve 30,000 households. And we've seen a lot of demand for this particular program. We're also seeing from, since we work with a lot of cities, that cities have historically allocated funding for single family home programs. And a lot of these programs, the money is just sitting there and not being used. And we would encourage sort of the reallocation to multifamily because that's where the need is. And it also would allow us to serve more drivers and and also ultimately have a greater impact on lower emissions on the road.
Thanks so much.
Ruben,
Please get in on this.
Yeah, if you're okay, because I agree. I think what I've noticed in our work is it's not just multifamily. We need actually multifamily is we need more money for that, but we also need money for community-based charging at the kinds of locations where the community does gather. So I think that is true. I also just want to echo the fact that there are many programs, and they're not just state-funded programs. There's utility programs that the PUC has approved or that local government utilities are running that are undersubscribed because people just aren't using them. And just in the last legislative session, there was an effort to take some of that money and just, spread it amongst all ratepayers evenly to reduce rates. And what I would say is, like, there are the programs that we try to access, they're out of money. So I'm just going to tell you that the other thing that happens in our meetings is somebody from government or from a utility will come and talk about programs, and it turns out that none of these programs have any money in them, or they're all out, right? Yet other programs that are intended for more broader use are underutilized. And so I would say there is a potential to look at, instead of sweeping all that money up and just giving it to everybody, let's look at the money that isn't being fully utilized and maybe moving it to some of these underfunded programs that focus on equity. I think that would be really good. And then I would just add that, yes, I think the other sort of myth is that if you invest in these low-income communities, that it'll cost less. And that is a myth. It is just going to cost more because they have been left behind. So that if we could remove, increase some of the amounts of funding, if you're in a priority community, maybe you get an additional stipend to help make up, rather than thinking it's going to cost less, recognize that it's actually not. It's going to cost more because they have been left behind for generations.
Thanks, Eileen. I'm going to let you speak. I want to invite everyone to realize the way to ask a question is to use the Q&A box, which should be at the bottom of your screen, and you should be able to type in a question there. That's how we'll be able to take your questions. I think there might have been a hand or two virtually raised, but we don't have the ability to do an interactive chat. But if you type in your question, then we'll be able to respond either in writing or as part of the discussion. Ariel, go ahead.
Great. So I think so I met Eileen a few months ago from a great friend and mentor, Senator Fran Pavley, who helped pass the California Clean Air Standards about 20 years ago. And it was a pleasure talking with Eileen because she really has such a heart for the underserved communities and trying to figure out, how do we address these charging deserts that are geographically in a region, and also pockets of people and communities that are also like desert-like, where there's no charging reaching them. And we had a great conversation around Eileen and ETcommunity's work for faith-based communities. So I believe you did a assessment of about 10 churches, mostly in South LA, and we met with GreenWealth to see what is that implementation pathway there. And I feel like this is such an interesting case study, because at GreenWealth side, I mean, this morning I went to the most high-end multifamily complex in downtown LA, and they have about 400 condos. The average cost of installing a charger there was about $5,000, because it's in a dense city center, plenty of infrastructure, big building, very wealthy, compared to in these churches in South LA, after you add on, you know, there's not grid capacity there. The parking needs to be repaved. There were security issues. We need to add gates. We need to add proper lighting, which we think of as a very basic site conditions. But many of these low-income communities lack that. So compared to where I was this morning, it's $5,000 to install a charger, but I believe we came to $25,000 to $30,000 only for the installation cost of installing a charger in a church. So I think that was just so interesting. And Eileen, did you want to share a bit more about that?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point in that, you know, the what we've looked at, the same is true for solar. Like, you go into these communities and we think we can install solar because it's a low income community. It meets all the demands. There's not adequate grid. They need quotes microgrids. And then you go in and, well, it turns out with the building stock being 1990 and much older, the roofs can't support solar, and the electrical system can't support solar. So I think that's just a case in point about the fact that these communities have been left behind for a long time. There's essential needs that are not met already. So the idea that you can just add an a charging infrastructure, it is the one example I get, they can't even upgrade their air conditioning because their electrical is not sufficient. And so yeah, I do think that is a myth out there. And I see it when people come and they want to like sponsor our events, even corporate. They think, okay, well, it's in a low income community, so it's going to cost less. And that's why it was so good to work with GreenWealth, because they didn't expect, they knew exactly. They came in knowing that this is just like an old apartment complex. Any older building is just going to cost more. And unless we find a way to cover that cost, these entire communities will just be left, they will get further behind. Their mobility options will decrease, and their access to basic services and jobs and employment and careers and education will also decrease. And that is a reality that I don't think any of us want.
Thanks, Eileen. And so thanks for that perspective of thinking about holistic investments in frontline communities that can help them to be climate resilient, and can help achieve the state's additive goals of building decarbonization, right? And achieving our clean energy as well as clean transportation goals within the needs of servicing mobility and energy needs of communities. Thanks, Maureen, for this latest question. A tremendous amount of state and federal funding is going into ZEV investments. I would say ZEV investments, I'd be curious about your perspective on whether how equitable focused that funding is from state and federal sources. My concern is that much of this funding may end up in the hands of bad actors and or entities unable to implement. Are you seeing any sign of this?
I'd love to take the first stab at that question. And Maureen, I love this question, because I think with EV charging industry can benefit from the lessons from solar, the lessons from LED, where there was a sudden rush for funding, and then we saw sort of what bad actors look like in this high incentive, high rebate, fast growing industry environment look like. I think your question of does all of the funding for low-income communities now cause an environment for bad actors in the charging infrastructure space to emerge. I can say from my perspective, there's a lot of players getting in, but low disadvantaged community actually doesn't have that many implementers still. And I almost think part of me even thinks I would take bad actors over no actors, because there's just not enough people doing this work. At GreenWealth, we finance community scale programs of the multi-million-dollar kind alongside cities, and our backers include Block Power, Goldman Sachs, and a lot of the traditional larger banks that are also supporting these big companies. These larger private lenders are still not lending for low-income communities because there's too much risk. In the business environment, it's a very high interest rate. Banks are being very conservative. And so it's just harder and harder right now in the private capital environment to access the funds to do this work, which is why it's so important that there are public funds there to subsidize it. But even with those subsidies, I can say, for example, we are working with a large city in Texas that got a large CFI grant award, and they have a 50% DAC plan to install community charging. And from the lender's perspective, they're still seeing, okay, we're putting these chargers there, but it'll probably be at least 3 years until these chargers get used at all. And so that just points to, I think, it's still without incentives, it just doesn't pencil for traditional business at the moment. So the ones that are actually doing the work in low-income communities, they're really taking a business risk here, or they're really impact focused and they're very committed for the communities.
And I would say I have not seen a whole lot of bad actors, and I do think that the investments that the state is making do need to flow beyond just big charging companies or other big companies. Some of the investment does need to flow directly to the community, and I think the state government is trying to. So not to say that all of it should go, because I just don't believe that's true. I think there's a benefit to basically, if you want money, you make the company make some of their investment in these communities that are just not going to be profitable. So you're asking a for-profit company to do something that's not profitable, and you're giving them some investment so that at least they will break even, right? And I think for the most part, the people that get into that business are good actors. It's just that they're still for-profit companies. They have to make money. That's how they employ people. So I don't see a whole lot of that. I will say, I think this is an excellent question, Maureen, because I'm just going to tell you that we have spent the last 4 years just building trust in these communities, because there is so many people who come into these communities and make promises thinking that they maybe even well-intentioned, but then they don't follow through. And that does apply to policymakers who have come to our meetings and talked to us about all of this money available, and yet realistically, none of it is available for you, right? And so, or the program is completely oversubscribed. And that's not just government, that's also, businesses that are investing philanthropic dollars. They'll come and talk about the wonderful philanthropic programs that they have, but oh, by the way, there's not any funding now for that. So I think we, as and you on the phone or on the call as policymakers, think about your own actions. Like, you really can't be talking about programs that don't have any funding, or programs that you hope will come online soon. That's a reason. There's a lot of distrust in these communities, and there's whether or not there are bad actors. The second, these communities have so much experience with people well-intentioned who are not able to deliver, that this level of distrust, that's just that you're asking about more. It's everywhere. It takes years to even get to the point where they're willing to trust what you say. So I personally, I don't see a lot of bad actors, but I do see a lot of distrust. And to be honest, it's earned. I mean, there's a reason for the distrust, and it goes back generations.
Oh, Ruben, if I may add just one more comment. So to the there are I think some bad actors or some trends that I'm starting to see that the EV infrastructure space is getting more and more enticing overall that I just want to highlight. The first thing, and this is I think from a risk perspective that I just want everyone on the call to know. One is safety. I think there's a gold rush that's happening, and there's a lot of EV manufacturers and hardware companies popping up. And I would urge all to just be very aware of safety requirements. So NLX, a large global charging company, just went bankrupt earlier this month, and they found that their chargers were unsafe, and that's all public information. They were in the top 5 most popular, most prolific charging companies out there, and I don't know the details necessarily. There was another company, EV Box, that also for different reasons ended up closing shop this month, but it's just there's so many new products flooding the environment, the ecosystem right now, and so we can't lose sight of the safety of the actual equipment. And I know that there are different safety standards, and California specifically has added safety measures and things around laws for the monetization of chargers so that it's fair for the drivers. And so I think that's very important. I believe that with installations too, there's just so much installation work, and the workforce is still ramping up. And with that gap, there can be a tendency for price gouging or cutting corners for quality installations, which is another safety issue. So I would flag that. And then the third one is owner operators. There are some that are using this opportunity to gouge the rates of which they charge the drivers. So they'll come in with a very attractive offer. I'll install everything for free. But with the small fine print, we come in saying we're going to charge 35 cents, but suddenly, oh, our policy changed, so now it's going to be 59 cents per kWh. So things like that policymakers should know, when it looks bad, when it's hurtful for adoption, when it's hurtful for drivers, especially those in underserved communities, those are the types of risk exposures.
Thank you for those deep dive answers into the marketplace. I want to get to Ross's question, and there's probably time for a couple more. So if you've got a burning question, get it in now. How do we convince those charged with putting in X number of chargers and service to put them in low-income communities when you've identified the cost can be significantly more than in non-disadvantaged communities, maybe as much as 5 times as high? Most grants are awarded competitively, so a 5x cost would disqualify them from getting the grant. And I'm curious, I think within the Energy Commission's portfolio of giving, at least half of those investments must serve DAC communities. So would appreciate, Eileen and Ariel, your perspectives.
Yeah, and I will start. I do think that that one of the ways to convince especially policymakers to allocate more money, because it is going to, I don't know about 5 times as much, but it is going to be more expensive. And there are going to be other, like, for example, in many of these places, they have security, but they may need, as Ariel pointed, they may need to beef up security and lighting. And so there are additional costs. And what I would suggest government do, and I remember, back in the day when we were passing air quality regulations and we didn't take into account the health impacts, the lost days of work, that we didn't. And so the American Lung Association and others in the environmental community came up with metrics that put prices on costs, like, they monetized the cost of the days lost of work because of asthma and air pollution. I'm wondering if we could do the same thing in these communities where, when you upgrade the electrical, yes, it costs twice as much, but then you have increased access to food for people that are food insecure. You have increased access to healthcare. You have increased mobility options. You have a cooling center that could not can accommodate and save more lives. So we sort of monetize, instead of saying, well, the only thing this upgrade is going to support is electric vehicles. Recognize that if you are upgrading a facility like a multi-unit dwelling or a place of worship or a community center, then you are building capacity with adding much more than just electric vehicles, and somehow monetize that. So you can get more funding if your location and adding charging will also add all of these other community benefits that actually save lives and protect public health. And so if there was a way to kind of look at that, and I challenge, I mean, especially the environmental community, and those that serve the homeless, food insecure people without jobs, to think about how we might monetize that, so we don't see it as, oh my God, it costs twice as much, but rather we're going to invest twice as much, and the benefits are going to overwhelm the benefit of investing in a high-income community where really the only benefit is now you can charge your car, right? Where they already have adequate food, they already have adequate everything. But if you invest in these communities, it may cost twice as much, but the benefits are way over twice as high. And so that's kind of how I would try to look at it. And something I've given a lot of thought to, because it just is more expensive. And the truth is our system is set up so that we compete against each other to keep costs low. We compete against each other to have match funding. These communities don't have any match. They can't even afford the services that they offer. So those kinds of things, if we could look at, I think Ariel said it, like if we had a parallel path where we didn't try to make these communities compete against communities that are more affluent, but recognized the benefits far outweigh just electric vehicles. And I've certainly learned that in spades over this last few years, is the benefits of electric vehicles go well beyond, if we can upgrade these communities, well beyond increased mobility.
I love the abundance model. Ariel, quickly, and then I want to
Yes,
get the last question.
I have just a quick response. I agree with Eileen that the way to make it pencil is to look at value add outside of the project. So the charger itself might cost more in a low-income community, but from a policy and a macro perspective, what does success mean for this project? Is it mean resiliency and workforce and a promise of jobs for technicians to continue to maintain these chargers? Is it commitment to the community so all of their drivers that drive for a living have a place to charge that's affordable? What are there environmental benefits from a city that maybe at a project level are not visible? And so it's up to policymakers in their community to assess what are those value adds.
Thank you for the abundance of benefits perspective that we need to aggregate to make these pencil out. We're fortunate to have a question from Senator Pavley. Would it make more sense in older communities that don't have adequate routes or energy upgrades to invest solar over parking lots with storage as an alternative, especially for some of these places, Eileen, you've mentioned, community centers, churches, schools, et cetera?
I think that is actually key in that it addresses other issues, which are, grid capacity issues, and where we actually do need more solar. And so I like the idea. I do think you're going to run into the same, and I know the senator knows this, you're going to run into some of the same questions in that putting in a solar system in a parking lot in a community center or a place of worship is going to cost more than putting it in a school in an affluent community. You know, it's just going to cost more. And so there are, I do think that this kind of trying anything that can make can give the community more self-sufficiency and more services, like I just think solar is a great example, and especially if you're using the solar to power the cooling center and to power the cars, and you know, to add to the grid, because the grid is already inadequate in these areas. And many of the utilities have programs that are looking at microgrids for particular communities where they are electricity deserts, if you will, or then so I do think that that is it's an excellent, it's sort of the abundance, it's adding to the abundance question. Like what if we could offer, you know, more security, more energy security to these communities at the same time that we're offering greater mobility and greater services. That I think anytime we can add to the take away some of the need and give these communities more resources, we're going to benefit. And I personally, I think things like energy upgrades go hand in hand with electric vehicles and building electrification, and that they do uplift. It goes well beyond just the shift to electrical stoves or more reliable electricity. It provides so many more benefits to these communities that really are so far behind. So if we could somehow capture that, monetize it in some way, and justify the additional expense in order to benefit these communities, I think we could go far. It requires a change in perspective. Maybe a parallel path. I think that's an excellent idea, actually.
Senator Pavley's point, would it make sense to, in older communities, to do these larger upgrades, panels and parking lots and carports and storage? As a millennial, I grew up, I was in college and in high school during the Obama era, where it was the first wave of the whole, you know, green incentives. And I saw solar carports go up for the first time as I was a student. And I can't tell you the impact. Well, now you can see the impact it had on me. But but the fact that in these communities, the energy transition is so in its nascency, and to have these projects that people can see and feel and be educated on, and know somebody who is working on those projects or maintaining those projects, I think have that outside of the box value to the community and also the industry in general at the beginning, to plant the seeds and get people comfortable and excited, that then proliferates other projects. So I love this idea.
Well, thank you both. Thank you for the excellent questions. I know that we could not get to all of them today, and I know that the hosts will follow up with this group and are available to answer individual questions. On behalf of E2 and Cali TC, thank you so much for participating in this discussion. We hope it's an entry point and not a final opportunity to engage in these important discussions. And my parting reminder is California, thanks to Senator Pavley's leadership and many of her colleagues and the constituencies that they represent, put markers down for very aggressive climate and clean air targets that we must meet by 2030 and 2045 for Californians and the world. And achieving these implementing outcomes for all Californians is the only way that we'll succeed in getting to where we need to go. And we don't do this in a zero-sum game. And I worry that if in a market of haves and have-nots that would happen without public policy and investments, we won't achieve the outcomes that frontline communities deserve and desperately need as we are in this transition, space for the next several years. Thank you, Ariel and Eileen, for the work that you do every day and for bringing some of that expertise and perspective to this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is so fun.
And thanks to everybody who participated. Appreciate that.